Hi everyone. Welcome back. We're glad to have you with us today. We got a new story to tell, so let's start. My life took a complete 180 last week, and honestly, I don't even know if I'm angry, relieved, or just plain numb. Let me tell you what happened. I just wrapped up the biggest deal of my career, a multi-million-dollar sale of the company my brother and I built from the ground up. It wasn't just business. This deal was supposed to mark the beginning of a new chapter for my wife, Melissa, and me. We had dreams of traveling the world, upgrading to that lakeside house she'd always wanted, and maybe even starting a small foundation together. You know, the usual happily ever after stuff. I was riding high, thinking about surprising her with an early return home. I'd wrapped up the paperwork a day ahead of schedule, booked a last-minute flight, and started picturing her face when I walked through the door with champagne in one hand and a bouquet of flowers in the other. Romance 101, right? The flight was uneventful, and so was the cab ride back to our quiet suburban neighborhood. It was late when I got there, probably around midnight. The streetlights cast long shadows, and everything seemed peaceful until I noticed something odd. Parked in the driveway was a sleek black BMW. It wasn't mine. It sure as hell wasn't Melissa's. At first, I thought it might belong to a delivery driver or a repairman. Maybe she'd had something fixed, and the guy had to leave his car overnight. Logical, right? But as I walked up the driveway, something in the pit of my stomach started twisting. The car was too pristine, too expensive-looking, and the vanity plate, some combination of letters and numbers I couldn't make sense of, felt oddly personal. I reached the front door and paused. The house was dark, but I could see a faint glow from the upstairs bedroom window. That wasn't unusual. Melissa often read in bed before going to sleep. What was unusual was the faint sound of music. Slow, jazzy music. Our bedroom playlist wasn't exactly smooth saxophone solos, if you catch my drift. I didn't rush in. Instead, I carefully unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was thick, almost stifling, like the house itself was holding its breath. My shoes barely made a sound on the hardwood floors as I walked through the living room and into the hallway. That's when I saw it. A man's jacket, draped over the back of the couch like it belonged there. My heart started pounding, but not in the way you'd expect. It wasn't anger or fear, just a kind of hollow thud that echoed in my chest. I wasn't ready to jump to conclusions yet. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe Melissa had needed help with something, and I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew. I crept upstairs, every step on the carpeted staircase muffled but deafening in my own ears. The bedroom door was cracked open, just enough for me to peek inside without being seen. And there it was, the scene that would play on repeat in my mind for the rest of my life. Melissa, in bed, with another man. They were asleep, thank God for small mercies. She was curled up on her side, one hand draped over his chest like they'd been doing this for years. He was snoring softly, completely oblivious to my presence. Now, here's the thing. I'm not the kind of guy who flies off the handle. Maybe it's a survival instinct, maybe it's sheer willpower, or maybe I was just too stunned to process what I was seeing. But instead of barging in and turning the place into a war zone, I did something I never thought I'd do. I pulled out my phone. I took pictures. Lots of them. The bed, their faces, the clothes scattered on the floor. It was all there, time-stamped and undeniable. I even took a short video of the scene, just to make sure no one could wiggle out of the truth later. When I was done, I slipped back downstairs, grabbed my suitcase from the front porch where I'd left it, and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave a note. I just got in my car and drove. I ended up at a 24-hour diner about 10 miles away, nursing a cup of black coffee and staring at my phone like it was a ticking time bomb. I had everything I needed to blow up Melissa's life, but I couldn't decide what to do next. Should I confront her? Call a lawyer? Send the photos to her family? Instead, I did something even stranger. I went back home. I crept in as quietly as I had before, slipped into the guest bedroom, and laid down on the bed, staring at the ceiling until the first rays of sunlight broke through the blinds. My mind was blank, and I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. The next morning, Melissa greeted me with a cheerful smile. "You're back early," she said, wrapping her arms around me like nothing had happened. I hugged her back, my expression neutral, and simply said, "Yeah, the deal went better than expected." And that was it. I went about my day as though I hadn't just seen the woman I'd loved for over a decade in bed with a stranger. She cooked breakfast, we talked about her plans for the week, and I even helped her water the plants. But here's the kicker. Every word I said, every smile I gave her, was a lie. I wasn't the husband she thought I was anymore. I was a man with a plan to expose her betrayal when she least expected it. So, here I was playing the role of the oblivious husband while my mind churned through every possible scenario. Let me tell you, nothing makes you question your sanity more than smiling at someone who's just shattered your world. Melissa didn't seem the least bit suspicious. She was her usual self, cheery, affectionate, and completely unaware of what I knew. It was almost impressive how well she could compartmentalize her life. If I hadn't walked in on the scene with my own eyes, I might have believed nothing was wrong. But I knew better. That day, as she chatted about her plans for lunch with her book club, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront her right away. Not yet. Confrontation was messy, emotional, and most importantly, it gave her power. Power to deny, to gaslight, to spin the story in ways that might make me doubt myself. No, I needed to stay calm and gather everything I could. After breakfast, I excused myself to run errands. What I was really doing was digging deeper into the mystery man I'd seen. Step one was the BMW. I'd snapped a picture of the license plate the night before, so I did some research online. Turns out, a few bucks and a little patience can get you a lot of information. The car was registered to someone named Evan Leary, a name that sounded like it belonged to a guy who wore too much cologne and thought popping his collar was still a good look. A quick social media search confirmed my suspicions. Evan was exactly what I expected. Mid-30s, gym selfies for days, and captions like "Rise and Grind" or "Hustle Harder." His profile was filled with vacation pics, fancy dinners, and a lot of shots of him standing next to his shiny BMW. The guy practically screamed midlife crisis in progress. The real kicker? He was single. No mention of a girlfriend, a wife, or even a cat. Perfect, I thought. At least I wouldn't have to deal with a double betrayal situation. While I was scrolling through Evan's posts, something caught my eye. A photo from last weekend, a romantic dinner at a fancy restaurant downtown. The caption read, "A night to remember." Sitting across from him, smiling coyly, was Melissa. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the realization of how long this must have been going on. She looked so comfortable, so at ease. Like cheating on her husband was just another item on her to-do list. But even then, I didn't lose my cool. Instead, I saved the photo, logged out of the account, and headed back home. That night, Melissa acted as though nothing was out of the ordinary. She curled up on the couch with me, laughing at some rom-com she insisted we watch. I played along, laughing at all the right moments, even as my mind raced with plans. The next morning, I decided to take things a step further. While Melissa was in the shower, I slipped into her office. Her laptop was on the desk, unlocked. Jackpot. Now, before anyone accuses me of invading her privacy, let me just say this. Privacy goes out the window when you're sleeping with someone else in our marital bed. I had every right to know what was going on. Her emails were a treasure trove of incrimination. Reservation confirmations for hotels, suggestive messages with Evan, and even one particularly bold exchange where she detailed her plans for their next rendezvous. It took everything I had not to smash the laptop right then and there. Instead, I forwarded the most damning emails to myself and made a mental note of the dates and locations. I was building my case one piece at a time. The final nail in the coffin came later that day. Melissa mentioned she'd be out late for a work meeting. The audacity of her lies was almost laughable at this point. I told her to have fun and even gave her a peck on the cheek as she left. As soon as the door closed, I sprang into action. I had a tracker app installed on her phone. One of those Find My Device features she'd activated months ago and forgotten about. Within minutes, I saw her heading downtown, straight to a boutique hotel. I followed her, parking a few blocks away to avoid suspicion. Sure enough, there was the BMW in the valet lot. I waited for a bit, watching as she and Evan walked hand in hand into the lobby, their body language casual, like they didn't have a care in the world. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I was out busting my ass to secure our future, she was out playing house with Mr. Jim Selfie. This time I didn't stop at just observing. I walked into the hotel, blending in like any other guest. It wasn't hard to figure out which room they were in. The reservation details from her emails told me everything I needed to know. I didn't knock or cause a scene. Instead, I planted a small recording device outside the door. Yeah, I know it sounds extreme, but I needed as much evidence as possible. Later that night, back at home, I listened to the audio. Hearing their voices, their laughter, their intimacy, it was like a dagger to the heart. But it also solidified my resolve. Melissa thought she was playing me for a fool. She had no idea that I was playing a much longer game. Playing the role of the clueless husband was harder than I expected. Every time Melissa smiled at me or touched my arm, it felt like a slap in the face. But I kept my composure. If I was going to do this right, I couldn't let on that I knew anything. A few days after her work meeting, Melissa seemed especially chipper. She even surprised me with breakfast in bed, something she hadn't done in years. I suppose guilt has a way of manifesting itself in unexpected ways. I played along, thanking her with a smile and digging into the eggs and toast like nothing was wrong. "You've been working so hard lately," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I just wanted to do something nice for you." "Thanks, babe," I replied, keeping my tone light. "You're the best." The irony wasn't lost on me. She really thought she could have her cake and eat it too. But what she didn't know was that her days of deception were numbered. That afternoon, I took another step in my plan. I visited an attorney. His office wasn't flashy, but he came highly recommended by one of my colleagues who'd gone through a nasty divorce last year. When I walked in, he greeted me with a firm handshake and a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put me at ease. "So, what brings you here?" he asked, gesturing for me to take a seat. I handed him a folder containing the evidence I'd collected so far. Photos, emails, even a transcript of the audio recording from the hotel. "My wife's cheating on me," I said bluntly. He flipped through the documents, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and nodded. "You've done your homework. This is solid." "Thanks. I didn't want to come in here without a plan." "Smart move. So, what's the goal here? Do you want a clean break, or are we going for scorched earth?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Part of me wanted to burn her entire world to the ground, to expose her lies and make her feel the same pain she'd inflicted on me. But another part of me just wanted to move on. "Let's keep it clean," I said after a moment. "But I want her to know that I know. I want her to see the consequences of her actions." He nodded. "Fair enough. I'll draft the paperwork and include all the evidence you've provided. When you're ready to serve her, just let me know." We spent the next hour going over the logistics, financials, property division, and what to do about the house. By the time I left his office, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time since discovering the affair, I had a clear path forward. Over the next few days, I kept a low profile. Melissa continued her routine, completely unaware that her perfect little world was about to implode. I even went out of my way to be extra attentive, asking about her day and helping around the house. If she noticed anything unusual about my behavior, she didn't let on. The only time I came close to breaking was during dinner one night. We were sitting at the table, talking about our plans for the weekend, when she mentioned she might have to work late on Saturday. I almost laughed out loud. She didn't even bother coming up with new excuses anymore. "Work again?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Yeah," she said, avoiding my gaze. "It's just been so busy lately. You know how it is." I nodded, taking a sip of my wine to hide my smirk. "Of course. Do what you need to do." Saturday came, and sure enough, Melissa left the house in her usual work outfit, a little too dressed up for spreadsheets and conference calls, if you ask me. I watched from the window as she drove off, then grabbed my keys and followed her at a safe distance. This time, she didn't go downtown. Instead, she headed to a quiet suburb about 30 minutes away. I parked a few houses down and waited, watching as she knocked on the door of a modest two-story home. Evan answered, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. He pulled her inside, and the door closed behind them. I sat there for a while, debating my next move. Part of me wanted to barge in and confront them right then and there. But I knew better. Patience had gotten me this far, and it would carry me through to the end. Instead, I drove back home and spent the afternoon putting the finishing touches on my plan. I double-checked the evidence, reviewed the timeline, and made sure every detail was in place. By the time Melissa returned that evening, I was ready. She walked in like nothing had happened, humming softly as she set her purse down on the kitchen counter. "Hey, babe," she said, smiling. "How was your day?" "Productive," I replied, keeping my tone casual. "How about you? Busy at work?" "Yeah, it was a long day," she said, stifling a yawn. "I'm exhausted." I nodded, biting back the sarcastic remark that threatened to escape. "Well, you should get some rest." She kissed me on the cheek and headed upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen. As I watched her disappear down the hall, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The moment of truth was getting closer, and I could already picture the look on her face when everything came crashing down. The day I decided to set everything in motion started like any other. Melissa left for work with a kiss on my cheek, her signature scent lingering in the air as the door clicked shut behind her. It was almost poetic how normal everything seemed, given that I was about to rip the facade of our marriage apart. My first call was to the lawyer. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. He confirmed that the paperwork was finalized and ready for delivery. All I needed to do was give the word, and the wheels would be in motion. The next step was making sure the timing was perfect. I wanted the reveal to be unmissable, a moment she couldn't deny or talk her way out of. For that, I needed an audience, specifically one that mattered to her. Melissa had mentioned a dinner party we were hosting for some friends and family that weekend. It was her idea, meant to show off the power couple dynamic we supposedly had. Little did she know, it was about to turn into the stage for her public unmasking. Over the next few days, I played the part of the doting husband flawlessly. I helped with the party preparations, running errands, cleaning the house, and even picking out a new outfit for the occasion. Every time she smiled at me or thanked me, I felt a pang of bitterness, but I pushed it down. On the day of the party, I couldn't help but admire how seamlessly Melissa carried herself. She flitted around the kitchen, arranging charcuterie boards and pouring drinks, laughing with guests as though she didn't have a care in the world. Meanwhile, I waited for the right moment, the evidence tucked away on a flash drive in my pocket. It was during dinner that I decided to strike. Everyone was seated around the dining table, glasses clinking and voices overlapping as plates of food were passed around. Melissa sat at the head of the table, her laughter ringing out like a bell. I stood, raising my glass. "Can I have everyone's attention for a moment?" The room quieted, all eyes turning toward me. Melissa looked up, her smile soft and expectant. "I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight," I began, my voice calm and even. "It means a lot to both of us to have such wonderful friends and family in our lives." There were murmurs of agreement and smiles all around. Melissa reached for my hand, giving it a squeeze. But I continued, pulling my hand away. "There's something I need to share. Something I've been keeping to myself for a little while now." Her smile faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket, holding it up for everyone to see. On this drive is a collection of emails, photos, and videos that tell a very different story about my marriage to Melissa. The silence was deafening. Melissa's face drained of color, her fork clattering against her plate. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. I turned to her, my expression neutral. "I'm talking about your affair, Melissa, with Evan." The room erupted in a mix of gasps and whispers. Melissa's eyes darted around the table, searching for a lifeline, but no one came to her rescue. "This isn't the time or place," she hissed, her voice low and urgent. "Actually," I said, my voice firm, "it's the perfect time and place. Everyone deserves to know the truth." I set the flash drive down on the table, sliding it toward her. "Feel free to share it with anyone who doubts me. The evidence is all there." Melissa's hands trembled as she picked up the drive, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. The rest of the dinner was a blur. Guests either left quietly, unable to handle the tension, or stayed out of morbid curiosity. Melissa excused herself to the bathroom, and when she didn't return after 10 minutes, I found her upstairs, sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at the drive like it was a ticking time bomb. "Why?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Why would you do this here? Like this? Why?" I echoed, my voice icy. Because you didn't think twice about destroying our marriage. This isn't about me humiliating you, Melissa. This is about you facing the consequences of your choices. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. I left her there, walking back downstairs to start cleaning up the mess left behind. By the time she came down, the party was over, and so was the charade of our marriage. The days following the dinner party felt like walking through the wreckage of a bombed-out city. Melissa tried to keep up appearances, but it was clear she was crumbling under the weight of her exposed betrayal. For the first 24 hours, she barely spoke. She paced the house like a ghost, clutching the flash drive like it was a lifeline, while I went about my day as if nothing had happened. I worked in my home office, ordered takeout for dinner, and even watched a basketball game on TV. Meanwhile, Melissa lurked in the periphery, her silence growing heavier by the minute. Finally, late that evening, she broke. "Can we talk?" she asked, standing in the doorway of the living room. I muted the game and gestured to the couch. "Go ahead." She didn't sit. Instead, she stood there, twisting her hands together, her face blotchy and red from crying. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice cracking. "I know that doesn't mean much right now, but I messed up, and I don't even know how to start fixing this." I leaned back, my expression unreadable. "Fixing this? Melissa, this isn't a leaky faucet or a flat tire. You didn't just mess up. You made a choice, a series of choices, actually, and every single one of them hurt me, whether you realized it or not." She flinched, tears spilling over. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I swear I didn't mean to." I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Melissa, you brought another man into our house. Into our bed. Do you know how humiliating that is? Do you even understand what that does to someone?" Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment I thought she might collapse. "I don't know why I did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't about you. It was never about you." That stung more than I cared to admit. If it wasn't about me, then what? Was I just background noise? An ATM? A placeholder? "No," she cried, shaking her head vehemently. "I love you. I never stopped loving you. I got lost. I don't even recognize myself anymore." I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. "You got lost? That's your excuse? You didn't seem very lost when you were sneaking off to hotels or hosting your little boyfriend while I was away busting my ass for us." Her sobs filled the room, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But it passed quickly, smothered by the anger and betrayal simmering beneath the surface. "This isn't something we can talk our way out of," I said, my tone final. "I've already filed for divorce." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What? No, you can't." "I can," I said firmly. "And I did. My lawyer will be in touch about the details." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. She stared at me, her lips trembling as though she wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked eventually, her voice trembling. "That depends," I said. "Are you going to make this harder than it needs to be? Or are you going to cooperate?" She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I don't know. I don't know what to do." I crossed my arms, my resolve firm. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to find somewhere else to stay while we sort this out. I don't care if it's with a friend, your family, or even Evan. But you're not staying here indefinitely. This is my home, and I need space." She looked up at me, her eyes swollen and desperate. "Evan means nothing to me. I swear, he doesn't." I laughed bitterly. "Funny, he looked pretty significant when you were sharing a bed with him." She winced, the sting of my words hitting their mark. "I'll stay at my sister's," she said finally, her voice hollow. "But can we at least talk again? Later? After we've had some time to think?" I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to slam the door on this chapter of my life and never look back. But another part, the part that had loved her for years, couldn't bring itself to say no. "Maybe," I said after a long pause. "But don't expect anything to change." She nodded, her expression unreadable, and stood. Without another word, she went upstairs to pack a bag. By the next morning, Melissa was gone. She left a note on the kitchen counter, apologizing once again and promising to give me the space I'd asked for. I read it once, then tossed it in the trash. For the first time in years, the house was completely silent. No footsteps on the stairs, no hum of conversation, no background noise of someone moving through my life. It was both a relief and a reminder of the void she'd left behind. But even in that silence, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The first few days after Melissa left were surreal. The house felt bigger, emptier. Her absence echoed in every corner, a quiet reminder of what had been lost, or more accurately, what had been broken. I woke up early each morning, not because I had somewhere to be, but because I couldn't sleep past sunrise. It wasn't sadness keeping me awake, exactly. It was more like my brain had gone into overdrive, constantly replaying the events of the past few weeks while trying to map out what came next. I decided to start small. First, I cleaned the house. Not the usual surface-level tidying, but a deep, cathartic scrub. I stripped the bed, washed the sheets, and threw out anything that reminded me of her. Half-empty bottles of perfume, knickknacks she'd picked up during our travels, even a set of wine glasses we'd bought together. It wasn't about erasing her. It was about reclaiming the space. The hardest part was sorting through the photos. Our wedding album, vacations, birthdays, it all felt like a record of someone else's life. I boxed them up and shoved them into the back of a closet, out of sight but not entirely out of mind. Maybe one day, I'd be able to look at them without feeling that familiar twist in my gut. By the end of the week, the house didn't just look different, it felt different. Cleaner, lighter, more mine. Melissa didn't reach out much during those first few weeks, and honestly, I preferred it that way. When she did text, it was mostly logistical stuff. Questions about the divorce paperwork, requests to pick up a few things she'd left behind. I kept my responses short and to the point. But one message caught me off guard. I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like to talk. Just once. For closure. Closure. The word sat heavy in my chest. What kind of closure was she hoping for? Did she want to explain herself, justify her actions, beg for forgiveness? Or was this just another way to ease her own guilt? I debated ignoring the message altogether, but something in me wouldn't let it go. Maybe I needed closure too. We met at a small cafe downtown, one of those places we used to go to on lazy Sunday mornings. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea. She looked tired, thinner somehow, as if the weight of everything had physically worn her down. "Hey," she said softly when I sat down. "Hey." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick, heavy with all the things left unsaid. Finally, she broke the silence. "Thank you for coming," she said, her hands wrapped tightly around her cup. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the table. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you, but I needed to say, I'm sorry. For everything." "Melissa," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You've apologized before. What's different about this time?" She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with tears. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us. About what I did. And I realized I ruined the best thing I ever had. You were always so good to me, and I took that for granted. I got caught up in something stupid and selfish, and I didn't stop to think about what I was throwing away." Her words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. "I'm glad you've had time to reflect," I said evenly. "But what exactly do you want from me? Forgiveness? A second chance?" She shook her head quickly, her tears spilling over. "No, I know I can't ask for that. I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see how badly I screwed up, and I'm sorry. There was a time when hearing those words might have meant something to me. But now, they felt hollow. Too little too late. I appreciate the apology," I said finally. "But it doesn't change anything. What's done is done." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I understand. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday. Not for me, but for you. So you don't carry this around forever." Her words stung, not because they were wrong, but because they were true. After the cafe, I walked through the park, letting the crisp air clear my mind. Forgiveness. The idea felt foreign, almost impossible. But as I watched the leaves fall from the trees, a thought occurred to me. Forgiveness wasn't about absolving her. It was about freeing myself. That night, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to Melissa, but to myself. I wrote about the love we'd shared, the betrayal that followed, and the strength I'd found in its aftermath. I wrote about my anger, my pain, and my hope for the future. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in the same box as the photos. It wasn't closure in the traditional sense, but it was a step. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, life began to move forward. I threw myself into work, reconnecting with old friends, and even picking up a few hobbies I'd abandoned over the years. The house felt less like a reminder of what I'd lost and more like a canvas for what I could build. Melissa faded into the background, her texts becoming less frequent until they stopped altogether. The divorce was finalized quietly, without fanfare or drama. Just a signature on a piece of paper, and it was done. I wouldn't say I was happy, not yet, but I was getting there. Once the divorce was finalized, I thought I'd feel a sense of completion, like closing a door on a stormy chapter of my life. Instead, I felt nothing, not emptiness exactly, but a kind of neutral stillness, like my emotions had been packed away along with the memories of Melissa. The silence in the house, which had once been suffocating, started to feel like a blank canvas. I realized that for the first time in years, my life was entirely my own. No obligations, no compromises, no tiptoeing around someone else's feelings. It was equal parts liberating and terrifying. The first thing I decided to do was travel. Not for work this time, but for myself. I'd always dreamed of visiting Europe, but had never gotten around to it. Melissa had always said it was too expensive, too far, too complicated to plan. Now, with no one to stop me, I booked a 2-week trip to Italy and France. When I told my friends, they were a little surprised. "You're going alone?" one of them asked, his tone skeptical. "Yeah," I said. "Why not?" And honestly, going solo turned out to be one of the best decisions I've ever made. In Rome, I wandered through ancient ruins and drank wine at sidewalk cafes, savoring the way the sunlight painted the cobblestone streets. In Florence, I marveled at art I'd only ever seen in textbooks, the grandeur of it making me feel small in the best way. By the time I reached Paris, I'd learned to enjoy my own company in a way I hadn't expected. One night, while sipping coffee at a cafe near the Seine, I struck up a conversation with a fellow traveler. Her name was Anais, a writer from Spain who was in Paris for a book festival. She had this way of speaking that made every sentence feel like poetry, and before I knew it, we were talking about everything: our lives, our dreams, our regrets. "I admire you," she said at one point, her eyes thoughtful. "To come here alone after everything you've been through, that takes courage." "I don't know if it's courage," I admitted. "Maybe it's just stubbornness. Or stupidity." She laughed, a soft, musical sound. "Whatever it is, it suits you." We spent the rest of the evening walking along the river, talking about nothing and everything. When we finally parted ways, I felt a strange lightness, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. When I returned home, things felt different. The house was still quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt peaceful, like it was waiting for me to fill it with new memories. I started making small changes, repainting the walls, rearranging the furniture, even adopting a rescue dog named Milo. He was a scrappy little terrier with more energy than sense, but his boundless enthusiasm was infectious. I also reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years because I'd been too busy or too focused on my marriage. One of them, Jake, was organizing a weekend hiking trip in the mountains and invited me along. "Are you sure you're up for it?" he teased. "It's not exactly a stroll in the park." "I'll manage," I said, grinning. "Just don't leave me behind if I collapse halfway up." The trip turned out to be exactly what I needed. There's something about being out in nature, surrounded by nothing but trees and sky, that makes you feel small in the best possible way. It reminded me that life is so much bigger than the things we let weigh us down. Work was another area where I found new purpose. For years, I've been grinding away, building something that had ultimately been sold off to the highest bidder. Now, with the financial cushion from the sale, I had the freedom to focus on projects that genuinely excited me. I partnered with a nonprofit that developed affordable housing in underserved communities, combining my business acumen with a cause I cared about. It wasn't as lucrative as my previous ventures, but it was fulfilling in a way that money couldn't match. Every now and then, I'd hear something about Melissa. A mutual friend mentioned that she'd moved to another city, started a new job, and was dating someone. It didn't bother me the way I thought it might. If anything, I felt a strange sense of relief. She was moving on, and so was I. One evening, as I sat on the porch with Milo at my feet, I realized that I didn't think about her as much anymore. The bitterness and anger that had once consumed me had faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. Forgiveness, it turned out, wasn't about condoning what she'd done. It was about letting go of the power it had over me. I won't pretend that everything is perfect now. I still have moments of doubt, flashes of loneliness, and the occasional pang of what-ifs. But for the most part, I'm okay. Better than okay. Actually, I'm rebuilding one step at a time, and for the first time in a long time, the future doesn't feel like something to fear. It feels like an open road, waiting to be explored. I didn't realize how much I'd changed until one sunny Saturday morning. I was walking Milo through the park, the leash loose in my hand as he trotted ahead, tail wagging like a metronome. The air was crisp, the sky impossibly blue, and for the first time in years, I felt light. It wasn't a lightning bolt moment or some grand revelation. It was more like an exhale I didn't know I'd been holding. I stopped by the lake, Milo tugging at the leash as he tried to chase a duck, and I laughed, a real, unforced laugh. That's when it hit me. I was happy. Happiness didn't come all at once. It was a slow process, like piecing together a puzzle when you're not sure what the picture is supposed to look like. But with each small step, the image became clearer. One of the biggest pieces was reconnecting with myself. For so long, I've been defined by my marriage, my work, my role as someone else's partner. But now, with all that stripped away, I had the chance to figure out who I was on my own. I started journaling, something I hadn't done since college. At first, it felt awkward, like I didn't know what to say. But as the weeks went by, the words started flowing. I wrote about everything, the highs and lows, the moments of clarity, and the ones that still stung. It became a way to process everything I'd been through and to remind myself of how far I'd come. Another piece was building new connections. Jake's hiking group became a regular part of my weekends, and through them, I met people who shared my love of the outdoors. One of them, a woman named Erin, quickly became a close friend. She had an easy laugh and a knack for turning even the most mundane stories into something hilarious. "It's like therapy," she said one afternoon, as we sat on a rocky outcrop overlooking a valley. "Being out here, away from all the noise, it puts everything into perspective, doesn't it?" I nodded, the wind ruffling my hair. "Yeah, it really does." Work continued to be a source of fulfillment. The nonprofit project I joined had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We were breaking ground on a new housing development, and seeing the plans take shape was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. It wasn't just about the work, though. It was about the people. My team was a mix of idealists and pragmatists, all of them passionate about making a difference. They reminded me of why I'd started in business in the first place. Not for the money or the accolades, but to create something meaningful. One evening, Erin invited me to a small gathering at her place. It was a casual thing, just a few friends, some good food, and plenty of laughter. I wasn't expecting much, but as soon as I walked in, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. The room was filled with people who were genuine, down to earth, and welcoming in a way that made me feel instantly at ease. That's where I met Sophie. She wasn't flashy or loud, but there was something about her that caught my attention. Maybe it was the way she listened so intently when someone else was speaking, or the way her smile lit up her entire face. We ended up talking for hours, tucked away in a corner while the party buzzed around us. She was an artist, she told me, working mostly in ceramics, but dabbling in painting when inspiration struck. Her hands, she said, were always covered in clay or paint, and she loved it that way. "I think it's important to get messy," she said, her eyes twinkling. "It means you're really living." I didn't know if it was her words or the way she said them, but something about that moment stayed with me long after the party ended. We started seeing each other slowly at first. Neither of us was in a rush, and I think that's what made it work. There was no pressure, no expectations. Just two people enjoying each other's company and seeing where it might lead. With Sophie, everything felt easy. We'd spend hours walking through art galleries, talking about everything from her latest projects to my adventures with Milo. She even joined one of the hiking trips, though she spent most of the time sketching the scenery instead of climbing. "You don't have to climb the mountain to appreciate it," she said, showing me a quick charcoal sketch she'd done of the peak. I smiled. "No, I guess you don't." A year after the divorce, I found myself back at the same cafe where Melissa and I had our final conversation. This time, though, I wasn't there for closure. I was there for coffee, a journal in one hand, and Milo snoozing at my feet. Looking around, I realized how much had changed. The pain of the past was still there, a faint scar I carried with me, but it didn't define me anymore. It was just one part of my story, not the whole thing. Sophie joined me a little while later, her sketchbook tucked under one arm. She kissed me on the cheek, her smile as bright as ever, and I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward to the new chapters waiting to be written. And you know what? Life might not be perfect, but it's mine.